The world crumbled not with a roar, but with a whisper. On the quietest, most excruciating day of my existence, the day I laid my beloved husband, Ernest, to rest, a cruel, impossible whisper pierced the suffocating silence of the grave. My name is Margot Hayes, and I am 66 years old, but the woman I became on that desolate Monday afternoon was utterly unrecognizable, a shadow haunted by a truth too horrifying to grasp. It wasn't the weight of grief that buckled my knees there beside Ernest's freshly dug plot, but the electric tremor of my phone. A message from an unknown number flashed, stark and terrifying against the backdrop of our solemn farewell. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My breath hitched, a silent scream trapped in my throat. My hands, already trembling from sorrow, now shook with an icy dread. Who was this phantom tormenting me? My fingers, clumsy with shock, tapped out a reply. "Who are you?" The response came almost instantly, taking what little air remained in my lungs. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." In that shattering moment, my soul felt as if it were torn in two, a gaping wound where my heart used to be. My eyes, still blurred from a lifetime of tears for Ernest, darted to where Charles and Henry, my own flesh and blood, stood by their father's grave. Their faces were strangely calm, their tears seeming oddly forced, their hugs chillingly hollow, like echoes from a distant, unfamiliar land. Something was terribly wrong. A monstrous premonition, cold and heavy, settled deep within me. The man I had loved for over 4 decades might not be beneath the cold earth, and the gravest betrayal was unfolding right before my eyes, orchestrated by the very people I had brought into this world. A love forged in dust. 4. 42 beautiful, unwavering years, Ernest wasn't just my partner. He was my sanctuary, the quiet anchor in every storm, the very reason I woke each morning. Our story began when I was a youthful 24 in the sleepy, sun-drenched town of Spring Creek. We weren't chasing grand dreams or glittering fortunes. We grew up on the same dusty back roads where life was simple, honest, and often hard. Our dreams were modest, born from necessity and a shared desire for a life better than what we knew. I spent my days cleaning houses, my hands raw from scrubbing, to support my ailing mother, while Ernest, with his quiet strength, repaired bicycles in the small, beloved shop he had inherited from his father. We were poor, yes, but oh, we were rich in a way money could never buy. We had a love so genuine, so pure, it felt like the sturdy backbone of our existence. I remember the first time he spoke to me with a clarity that still makes my heart ache. It was a Tuesday morning, vibrant with the promise of a new day, yet I felt weighted down by my faded green dress and worn-out shoes as I headed to the market. Suddenly, Ernest emerged from his shop, his hands smudged with grease, a shy, endearing smile spreading across his face. That smile, filled with a tenderness that spoke volumes, captured my heart instantly. "Good morning, Margot," he said, his voice as soft and comforting as a summer breeze. "Need me to check out your bike?" I didn't even own a bike, but I quickly fabricated an excuse, anything to prolong that unexpected, precious conversation. That simple exchange blossomed into countless dates beneath the ancient, majestic oak tree in Town Square Park, its branches witnessing the quiet unfolding of our love story. Promises of eternal devotion were whispered under its dappled shade, culminating in a simple, heartfelt wedding, overflowing with hope and the innocent belief in a future built on love alone. Our first few years together were undoubtedly a test of our resilience. We lived in a humble 2-bedroom house, its tin roof a constant reminder of our modest circumstances. When the rains came, a symphony of drips filled our home, and we'd set out pots and pans across the floor, catching the leaks with a shared laugh and a knowing glance. Yet, despite the leaks and the constant struggle, we were happy. Ernest worked tirelessly, from the first blush of dawn to the last embers of sunset, his hands always busy in his shop. I, in turn, found purpose and a small income sewing clothes for the women of our town, my needle weaving not just fabric, but the very threads of our shared future. The shifting sands of family. Then Charles arrived, a bundle of pure joy, and I thought my heart would simply burst with happiness. He was a beautiful baby, with Ernest's deep, knowing eyes and my own wide smile. 2 years later, Henry made his entrance, equally perfect, equally adored. I poured every ounce of my love into raising them, sacrificing my own needs without a second thought. believing that their happiness was my own. Ernest was, by every measure, a truly wonderful father. He'd take them fishing in the river on lazy Sundays, teaching them the patience of the water and the value of a quiet moment. He taught them to fix things with their own hands, instilling in them a practical wisdom that had served him so well. And every night, before bed, he'd spin tales for them, weaving dreams and lessons into the fabric of their young minds. I nurtured them, dressed them, and offered endless comfort whenever their small worlds felt too big to handle. We were, or so I believed with every fiber of my being, an unbreakable, close-knit family. As my boys grew, however, subtle, unsettling changes began to ripple through our peaceful existence. Charles, the older one, always possessed a restless ambition. From a surprisingly young age, he'd question our modest life, his voice tinged with a youthful impatience. "Why do we live so simply, Mom? Why don't we have a car like other families?" he'd ask, his eyes already looking beyond the dusty streets of Spring Creek. Henry, ever the follower, shadowed his older brother in every thought and action. When Charles turned 18, Ernest, with pride in his voice and heart, offered him a place in the bicycle shop, hoping to pass on his legacy. But Charles rejected it with a disdain that stung Ernest deeply. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad," he declared, his voice hard. "I'm going to be someone important." Those words, though never openly discussed between Ernest and me, sliced through him like a blade. I'd often find him sitting on the porch late at night, staring at the distant stars, a profound sadness etched into his face. His son had not only rejected his craft, his livelihood, but the very essence of his simple, honest way of life. The years marched on, and to my initial surprise and swelling pride, Charles indeed began to make a name for himself. He secured a job at a formidable real estate company in the bustling city, quickly rising through the ranks. Henry, never far behind, soon followed, drawn by the allure of his brother's success. Both began earning money, vast sums that dwarfed anything Ernest and I had ever dreamed of. At first, my heart swelled with immense pride. My sons were achieving what we never could, breaking free from the shackles of poverty, building lives of that apparent prosperity. But little by little, that initial joy began to curdle into a quiet, persistent sadness. Their visits became fewer and farther between, their phone calls growing conspicuously shorter. When they did grace us with their presence, they arrived in gleaming, expensive cars, their bodies draped in fancy suits, their conversations filled with talk of complex investments and sprawling properties. They would look at us, Ernest and me, with a strange, unsettling mix of pity and thinly veiled shame. "Mom," Charles said to me during one of their increasingly sporadic visits, his voice laced with a gentle but firm persuasion, "you and Dad really should consider moving somewhere better. This house is literally falling apart." He wasn't entirely wrong. The house was old, showing the wear and tear of decades. But that house, that humble structure, held every precious memory of our shared life. It was where we had brought our babies home, where we had raised our sons, where thousands of meals had been shared, where we had weathered life's storms and grown old together. It wasn't grand, certainly, but it was our home, infused with the warmth of our love and the echoes of laughter. Ernest, ever the sage, would often confide in me, his voice heavy with a quiet resignation. "Margot, money has changed our boys. We just aren't enough for them anymore." I resisted believing him, clung fiercely to my maternal hope. I kept justifying their prolonged absences, their hurried calls, their carelessly broken promises. "They're just busy building their lives," I'd tell myself, a fragile mantra against the encroaching doubt. "Someday, they'll be the loving boys we raised again." But deep in my heart, a cold certainty was settling in. Ernest was right. We had lost our sons long ago. Before the actual loss of my husband, I just didn't yet comprehend the terrifying extent to which we had become utter strangers to them. # Seeds of Doubt. The most drastic palpable change arrived with Charles's marriage to Jasmine Albright, a woman from the city who made no secret of her disdain for our simple, small-town lifestyle. The first time he brought her home, she arrived like an alien creature, her impossibly high heels sinking into the familiar dirt of our porch, an elegant red dress, more expensive than everything I had ever owned, clinging to her slender frame. "Nice to meet you," she uttered with a forced smile, barely extending the tips of her manicured fingers to offer a polite, distant greeting. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, swept across our humble home with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, but one that made me feel acutely small and insignificant. During dinner, a meal I had lovingly prepared with all my heart, Jasmine barely touched her plate. She pushed the meatloaf around, meticulously cut tiny pieces of chicken, but ate almost nothing. Charles, by her side, seemed visibly nervous, constantly apologizing for things he had never before been ashamed of. "Next time we'll take them out to a proper restaurant," he whispered to Jasmine, believing I couldn't hear. But I heard him. Every word, every hushed promise, pierced my heart like 1,000 tiny knives. Henry, for his part, remained unmarried, but he swiftly adopted the same cool, distant attitude as his brother. His visits dwindled to only the most obligatory special occasions, and even then he always seemed consumed by an urgent need to depart. His phone was a permanent fixture in his hand, his conversations peppered with talk of closing deals, even as we attempted to bridge the growing chasm between us. "Mom, I have to go," he'd always declare, cutting short our brief interactions. "I have an important meeting early tomorrow." The cherished family Sundays, once a cornerstone of our week, faded into a wistful memory. Christmases, once warm and boisterous, grew cold and formal, marked by expensive gifts we neither needed nor truly wanted. My sons would stay for a polite 2 or 3 hours, then leave with an almost palpable sigh of relief, escaping back to their lives of grandeur. Ernest and I, left increasingly alone, simply grew old together, comforting each other in the quiet solitude, our bond deepening even as our family fractured. He continued to toil in his shop, though his once strong hands now harbored less strength. I persevered with my sewing, but my eyesight too had begun to dim. We made do with our meager income, fiercely proud of never asking for a single thing from our outwardly successful sons. "Do you know what the saddest part is, Margot?" Ernest once asked me one evening, his voice a low murmur as we sipped our coffee on the porch, the cicadas providing the only chorus. "It's not that they have money, it's that the money has made them believe we aren't important anymore." He was right, as always. My sons hadn't just transformed financially, their very hearts had shifted. We were no longer their beloved parents, the bedrock of their beginnings. We had become an uncomfortable, inconvenient reminder of a past they desperately wished to erase. The situation escalated when Charles acquired a sprawling $250,000 house in an exclusive, gated community in the city. Henry, not to be outdone, followed suit soon after, investing in a lavish luxury condo, a monument to his newfound wealth. Suddenly, our sons were masters of fortunes we couldn't even begin to imagine. "You really should sell this house and move into a retirement community," Jasmine suggested during one of her rare, brief visits, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "There are some very nice places for people your age. You'd be so much more comfortable." The word community hit me like a physical blow, a stinging slap. A retirement community. After 40 years of building our home, after pouring every ounce of love into raising these boys, they wanted to shunt us off to a home for the elderly. "We don't need a home," Ernest retorted, his voice imbued with the quiet dignity that always defined him. "We're perfectly fine here in our house." But I saw the identical expressions on Charles and Henry's faces. They supported Jasmine's idea, their silent agreement a chilling confirmation. To them, we were no longer parents, we were a burden. A problem to be neatly solved in the most convenient, efficient way possible. It was then that the direct suggestions, laced with thinly veiled pressure, began in earnest. The unseen hand of betrayal. Charles arrived one day, papers in hand, documents he had meticulously prepared without a single consultation with us. "Dad, Mom," he began, that polished, fake smile plastered across his face, a smile he had perfected for the city. "I've been giving a lot of thought to your future. This house, well, it's probably worth, at most, $1,000. If you sell it, I can add some money myself so you can move somewhere truly better, a more suitable place." To Ernest and me, there was no place on earth better than the home where we had found such enduring happiness for decades. But Charles couldn't comprehend that. For him, everything was reduced to numbers, to cold monetary value. "Besides," he continued, pressing his advantage, "I really think Dad should retire from the shop. He's already 70 years old. It's time for him to rest." Ernest looked at him, his gaze heavy with an infinite sadness, a silent reproach. "Son," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "working isn't a burden for me. It's what keeps me alive, what gives meaning to my days." "But you could get hurt, Dad," Henry insisted, ever backing his brother. His voice edged with a manufactured concern. "At your age, an accident would be very dangerous." Their words on the surface sounded caring, but I sensed something far darker beneath them. An impatience, an unsettling urgency I couldn't quite grasp. The following months were tense, stretched taut with unspoken anxieties. My sons intensified their pressure for us to sell the house. They began bringing real estate agents to our home without bothering to inform us. They had the property appraised without our explicit permission. They even started framing their demands as what would be best for everyone. "Look," Charles said to us during one particularly uncomfortable dinner, his tone laced with exasperation. "Jasmine and I have decided we want to have kids soon. We're going to need help with the expenses. If you sell the house and move to a smaller place, that money could be an early inheritance for us." An early inheritance? He was asking for our inheritance while we were still alive, still breathing. The sheer audacity of the request left me speechless, my heart pounding in disbelief. Ernest, though visibly calm, had a jaw that tensed almost imperceptibly. "Son," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "when your mother and I pass on, everything we have will be yours. But while we're alive, our decisions are our own. Don't be stubborn," Henry cut in, his voice sharp with a harshness I had never before heard from him. "You're old now. You can't keep living in the past." That night, after they had finally left, Ernest and I stayed up talking until the first hints of dawn. For the very first time in our long and devoted marriage, we discussed the heartbreaking possibility that our sons were not the men we thought we had raised. "Something's wrong, Margot," my husband whispered, a look of profound worry in his eyes that I had never witnessed before. "This isn't just ambition or impatience. There's something much darker, much more sinister behind all this pressure." I had no way of knowing then how profoundly correct his words were. I couldn't possibly imagine that my own sons were orchestrating something that would irrevocably alter our lives, and mine especially, forever. I didn't know that the tragedy looming on the horizon wouldn't be a cruel twist of fate, but a meticulously planned conspiracy, carefully orchestrated by the two people I had trusted most in this world. The last normal conversation I had with Charles transpired just 3 weeks before Ernest's death. He came alone, without Jasmine, and his demeanor was more serious than usual, a solemnity I couldn't quite place. "Mom," he said, settling into the familiar worn chair at the kitchen table, the very table where he had eaten countless breakfasts as a boy, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, Henry and I will always take care of you." His words at the time had a soothing effect, a balm to my anxious heart. But now, recalling them beside Ernest's grave, they sent a chilling shiver straight down my spine. Why did he say no matter what happens? What did he know that I, in my blindness, did not? Unveiling the poison. The accident that irrevocably changed everything occurred on a Tuesday morning, a day that started like any other. Ernest had left early for his shop, a ritual he had faithfully performed for over 4 decades. I was in the kitchen, humming softly as I prepared his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone shrieked with an urgency that sent an icy current through my veins. "Mrs. Hayes," an unfamiliar voice asked, clipped and professional. "I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The words blurred in my mind, dissolving like ink in water. The world around me spun to a halt. My legs turned to jelly, and I had to clutch the doorframe to prevent myself from collapsing. "What happened? Is he okay? Is he alive? Is he in the ICU?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "Ma'am, please come as soon as possible," the voice urged, bypassing my frantic questions. The journey to the hospital was a hazy, nightmarish blur. My kind neighbor Doris had to drive me as my entire body was shaking so violently I couldn't even grip the keys. The whole way there, my mind stubbornly refused to process the unfolding horror. Ernest was always so careful, so meticulous in his work. How could such a catastrophic accident have happened? When we finally arrived at the hospital, Charles and Henry were already there. This surprised me, a tiny flicker of confusion in my storm of despair, because no one had notified them yet. At least, not me, his primary emergency contact. But in my overwhelming desperation, I couldn't afford to pay attention to such a seemingly minor detail. "Mom," Charles said, rushing forward to embrace me with a force that seemed genuinely heartfelt, "Dad is in very bad shape. The doctors say one of the machines at the shop exploded. He has severe burns and a traumatic brain injury." Henry's eyes were red, surely from crying, but something in his expression felt distinctly off. He seemed more nervous than truly sad, like someone anxiously awaiting crucial news rather than grieving for his father. "Can we see him?" I pleaded, desperation coloring my voice. "Only immediate family, one at a time, for 5 minutes maximum," the nurse explained gently. When I finally entered that sterile ICU room, my heart plummeted to the soles of my feet. Ernest, my strong, vibrant Ernest, was a tragic tableau, hooked up to a dozen beeping machines, bandages obscuring most of his beloved face and arms. I barely recognized him through the gauze and tubes. His breathing was labored, artificial, kept going by the relentless, rhythmic hiss of the machines. I walked to his bedside, my steps heavy, and gently took his hand, the only part of his body that seemed untouched, intact. "Ernest, my love," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm here. Everything is going to be all right. You're going to recover, just like you always do." For a fleeting moment, I felt a faint, almost imperceptible squeeze in my hand. His eyes moved behind their closed lids. He was fighting. My warrior, my Ernest, was fighting with all his might to return to me. The next 3 days stretched into an eternity, the longest of my life. I practically lived at the hospital, dozing fitfully in the uncomfortable chairs of the waiting room. Charles and Henry took turns accompanying me, but they always seemed more interested in hushed conversations with the doctors than in offering comfort to their dying father. I overheard fragmented conversations, half phrases that, at the time, I couldn't fully comprehend. Henry inquired about medical insurance, about the escalating costs of treatment. Charles was constantly on his phone, talking in low tones about life insurance policies and beneficiaries. "Mom," Charles said to me on the second day, his voice oddly detached, "we reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a life insurance policy for $50,000. There's also a workers' comp policy that could cover up to another $75,000. Why, I wondered. Was he discussing money with me when Ernest was still clinging to life by a thread? Why was he consumed with insurance policies instead of his father's agonizing recovery? "I don't care about the money," I snapped, my voice harsh with pain. "I just want your dad to get better." "Of course, Mom," he said, but I saw something in his eyes that I utterly disliked, a coldness, a detached calculation at work while his father lay dying. On the third day, Dr. Patterson, an older man with a deeply compassionate expression, gathered us in a small, somber office to deliver the most devastating news of my life. "Mrs. Hayes," he began softly, his voice heavy with regret, "your husband's condition is critical. The burns have become severely infected, and the head trauma is far more severe than we initially thought. We have to be realistic about his chances." "What does that mean?" I asked, though a cold dread had already answered the question in my heart. "It means we need to prepare for the worst. Your husband is in an induced coma. We could keep him alive indefinitely with machines, but his quality of life, well, it's highly unlikely he will ever regain consciousness." My world, already fractured, completely fell apart around me. 42 years of marriage, an entire life meticulously built together, now they were telling me it was all fading away like smoke. "We want to try everything," I choked out through my sobs. "No matter the cost, no matter how long it takes." But Charles exchanged a quick, unsettling look with Henry, a silent communication that deeply unsettled me. "Mom," Charles said, his voice attempting to sound understanding, "we have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden on anyone." A burden. The word ignited a furious rage within me, a fire I hadn't known I possessed. "He's your father. He's not a burden. He's the man who raised you, who worked his entire life to give you the very best he could." "We know, Mom," Henry interjected, his voice softening just enough to be manipulative. "But we also have to think about you. The medical bills are going to be enormous. They could wipe out all your savings. Again, money. Always money. My husband was dying and they were coldly calculating costs. That night, alone in the hospital room, I clutched Ernest's hand and spoke to him, pouring out my heart as if he could hear every word. My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine my life without you. It was then that something happened, something that still gives me goosebumps, a moment that defied all medical explanation. His fingers moved ever so slightly, squeezing mine with a force that was almost imperceptible. His lips moved too, as if he were desperately trying to form words, but no sound escaped. He's reacting. He's trying to talk, I cried, desperate, calling for the nurses. But by the time they arrived, Ernest had returned to his previous unresponsive state. The nurse checked the monitors, shook her head gently. Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, ma'am. It doesn't mean he's conscious. But I knew, with an unshakable certainty, what I had felt. Ernest had tried to communicate with me. He had fought through the haze of his coma to tell me something vital. 2 days later, in the desolate early hours of Friday morning, the machine alarm shrieked, shattering the hospital's hushed calm. Lights flashed erratically. Nurses rushed, their footsteps urgent, toward Ernest's room. I was dozing fitfully in the hallway when the cacophony ripped me from my uneasy sleep. No, 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 I screamed, running blindly toward his door. Doctors worked frantically for 40 agonizing minutes, attempting to resuscitate him, but it was a futile battle. At precisely 4:37 in the morning, Ernest was officially declared dead. The pain that tore through me in that moment was visceral, a physical agony, as if my very heart had been brutally ripped from my chest. I collapsed by his bed, clinging to his still warm body, my mind stubbornly refusing to accept that he was gone. Forever. Charles and Henry arrived at the hospital barely an hour after their father's death. They seemed disturbingly prepared, as if they had been anticipating the call. They carried papers, documents, and a list of phone numbers for funeral homes. We already talked to the Spring Creek Funeral Home, Charles informed me, his voice eerily composed while I was still crying inconsolably. They can pick up the body this morning. We also contacted the insurance, Henry added, equally businesslike. The claim process is already underway. How, I wondered through my haze of grief, could they be so efficient, so organized, so utterly cold just an hour after losing their father? Something was profoundly wrong. But my grief was so overwhelming, so absolute, that I couldn't think clearly, couldn't articulate the growing unease. The funeral was hastily scheduled for the following Monday. Charles took charge of all the arrangements, barely consulting me. He chose the simplest casket, the shortest service, as if desperate to get it all over with as quickly as possible. "It's what Dad would have wanted," he said dismissively when I complained about being excluded from the decisions. Something simple, without a fuss. But that wasn't true. Ernest deserved better than this indecent rush to bury him and forget. The reckoning. The day of the funeral arrived, shrouded in a heavy, cold cloud, as if the very sky itself was weeping for Ernest. I wore my only black dress, the same one I had worn for my mother's funeral years ago, a somber echo of past sorrows. My hands shook so violently that Doris, my dear friend, had to help me with the tiny buttons on the back. "Be strong, Margot," she whispered, carefully combing my now white hair. "Ernest would want to see you strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, an empty shell, a soul adrift. 42 years of shared life, of love, couldn't be buried so easily. Every object in our home, now a silent monument to his absence, reminded me of him. His favorite coffee mug on the kitchen table, his well-used tools on the porch, his pillow that still faintly held his comforting scent. When we arrived at the cemetery, I was struck by the shockingly small number of attendees. I had expected to see more of Ernest's co-workers from the shop, more neighbors, more acquaintances, people he had touched throughout his life. But it was only Charles, Henry, Jasmine, Doris, myself, and the pastor. For a man who had lived 70 years in the same town, who had helped so many with his kindness and skill, the funeral seemed strangely, chillingly empty. "Where are the guys from the shop?" I asked Charles, my voice laced with a confusion that cut through my grief. "We didn't want to bother anyone," he replied quickly. Too quickly. Dad was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate. But that wasn't true. Ernest loved his community. He deeply cared about his neighbors. He would have wanted them to come and say goodbye. Why had Charles decided to make everything so secretive, so rushed? During the brief service, I watched my sons with a strange, almost clinical emotional detachment. Charles wore a solemn expression, appropriate for the occasion, but his eyes constantly darted toward his watch. Henry seemed restless, fidgeting, as if he had far more important engagements to attend to. Jasmine, behind her black veil, discreetly checked her phone. This was their goodbye to their father. Impatience, distraction, and an unsettling lack of genuine sorrow. The pastor spoke of eternal life, of well-deserved rest, of reuniting with God. His words felt hollow, meaningless in my shattered heart. I didn't want Ernest to rest in peace. I wanted him to come home with me, for us to continue growing old together, for us to keep drinking coffee on the porch every single evening. When it was time to throw dirt onto the casket, my legs simply refused to hold me upright. Doris had to support me as I sobbed uncontrollably, the finality of the moment crushing me. The dull thud of the dirt hitting the wood was absolute, conclusive, utterly hopeless. It was at that exact, soul-crushing moment, standing beside my husband's grave, that my phone vibrated again. A text message from that unknown number. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." My heart stopped dead in my chest. The letters danced before my eyes. As if I were hallucinating, my mind finally breaking under the unbearable weight of grief. With trembling hands, I replied, "Who are you?" The answer came instantly, chilling me to the bone. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone slipped from my grasp as if it were burning hot. Doris bent down to pick it up, but I stopped her abruptly, a sudden surge of protectiveness washing over me. I couldn't let anyone else see those messages, not until I understood what sinister game was afoot. "Are you okay, Mom?" Charles asked, approaching me with an expression of manufactured concern. I stared at him, desperately searching for any clue, any flicker of truth on his face. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every gesture, every word, every expression felt tainted with suspicion. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice strained, stuffing the phone deep into my purse. "I just need to go home." On the agonizing drive back, I couldn't shake those messages from my mind. Was it possible that someone was playing a cruel, twisted joke at the absolute worst moment of my life? Or was there truly a possibility that Ernest was alive? But if he was alive, who had we just buried? And if he wasn't, who knew enough intimate details about our lives to write something so specific, so devastatingly accurate about our sons? That night, alone in my house, which now felt like a cold, empty tomb, I painstakingly reviewed every detail of the last few days. Ernest's accident had been strange from the very beginning. According to Charles, a machine had exploded in the shop, but Ernest knew every screw, every wire in that place. He was meticulous about maintenance, almost obsessive about safety. Plus, how had my sons gotten to the hospital so quickly if no one had notified them yet? The hospital had called me first. I was the emergency contact. How did they know about the accident before I did? And then there was the money. From day one, Charles and Henry had talked about insurance policies and beneficiaries as if they had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. I decided, with a sudden surge of resolve, to check Ernest's papers. In his old, sturdy wooden desk, he kept all his important documents in a metal box, a veritable vault of our shared life. Insurance policies, the deed to the house, shop documents, everything was there. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy that Charles had mentioned, but then I found something I didn't remember. The policy had been updated just 6 months earlier, increasing the coverage from a modest $5,000 to a substantial $50,000. Why had Ernest increased his life insurance? He had never mentioned that significant change to me, and more importantly, who had suggested he do it? I continued searching, my heart pounding with growing dread, and found something even more disturbing. A workers' compensation policy that I knew absolutely nothing about, purchased just 2 months before his death. $5,000 in case of accidental death on the job. $15,000 in total. A fortune for a family like ours, but also a sum tempting enough for someone without scruples. My phone vibrated again. A new message from the same unknown number. check the bank account, see who's been moving money. This time I didn't hesitate. This person, whoever they were, knew too much to be a mere prankster. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew details that only someone intimately close to us could possibly know. The very next day, a Friday that felt colder than usual, I went to the bank where Ernest and I had kept our account for over 30 years. Mrs. Thompson, the manager, a kind woman who had known us forever, greeted me with sincere, watery condolences. "Margot, I'm so terribly sorry about Ernest. He was such a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil within me. "I came to check our accounts. I need to understand our financial situation." She showed me the bank statements from the last 6 months. What I saw next froze me to the bone. Over the past 3 months, large, unexplained withdrawals had been made from our savings account. $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March, money that I had absolutely no knowledge of being moved. "Who authorized these withdrawals?" I asked, my voice trembling now, unable to hide the shock. "Your husband came in person," Mrs. Thompson explained, her brow furrowed. "He said he needed the money for repairs at the shop." But I kept the household accounts. I knew exactly how much money we had and precisely what we spent. Ernest had never once mentioned expensive repairs at the shop, and we definitely had never discussed withdrawing thousands of dollars from our carefully guarded savings. "Do you have the signatures for those withdrawals?" I asked, a desperate hope flickering within me. She showed me the receipts. Indeed, it looked like Ernest's signature, but something about the handwriting seemed off. It was too shaky, too uncertain for his usually firm, clear script. "Mrs. Thompson," I asked, my heart pounding like a drum, "did he come alone to make these withdrawals, or was someone with him?" She thought for a moment, her gaze distant. "Now that you mention it," she mused, "I think he came in with one of your sons once or twice. Charles, I think. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Ernest had trouble reading documents without his glasses. Charles, my son. He had been involved in money withdrawals I knew nothing about, using his father's supposedly tired eyes as an excuse. But Ernest saw perfectly well with his glasses, which he never took off during the day. That afternoon, as I pored over the bank receipts again and again, the numbers blurring before my tear-filled eyes, I received another message. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Ernest he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. I could no longer deny the mounting, horrifying evidence. The mysteriously increased insurance policies, the unauthorized money withdrawals, Charles's undeniable presence in financial transactions I knew nothing about, his suspicious efficiency in organizing the funeral, his unnerving coldness during his father's agonizing last days. But the question that truly terrified me was this. If they had really planned Ernest's death, how had they done it? And who, in God's name, was sending me these messages? How did this person know so much about what had happened? The following days dissolved into a waking nightmare of gnawing doubt and paralyzing suspicion. Every one of Charles's forced smiles, every one of Henry's hollow hugs, every word of condolence they uttered felt like a grotesque mask, hiding something sinister and unspeakable. But I desperately needed more proof, concrete evidence, before I could fully accept a truth as horrible as the one slowly taking shape in my shattered mind. My phone continued to receive messages from the mysterious number, each one a chilling breadcrumb leading me closer to the precipice. "Go to Ernest's shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see." I decided with a fearful resolve to go to the shop, the place I had avoided since the accident for the first time. Charles had said a machine had exploded, but when I arrived, I found something entirely different from what I expected. The shop was eerily clean, far too clean to have been the scene of a violent explosion. There were no burn marks scarring the walls, no debris scattered on the floor, no telltale signs of the destruction that such a serious accident should have caused. "Where is the machine that exploded?" I asked aloud, my voice echoing in the silent, empty space. I searched every corner of the shop only to find every single machine in its proper place, looking perfectly functional. The welder, the compressor, the electric saw, all were intact, humming with the phantom possibility of work. What, then, had truly been the cause of the accident? In Ernest's desk, tucked away in a hidden compartment, I found something that sent a bone-chilling tremor through me. A note, written in his familiar, clear handwriting, dated just 3 days before his death. Charles insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Margot, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. Below that note was another, scrawled almost frantically. Henry brought me some papers to sign. He says they're to modernize the shop, but I don't understand what it's about. Why all the hurry? My husband had harbored suspicions. He had intuited the malevolent intentions of our sons, but he had died before he could tell me, before he could protect himself or me. I kept searching, my hands trembling, and found an envelope sealed with my name on it. I opened it with shaking fingers. It was a letter from Ernest. My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. In recent months, I've noticed strange changes in Charles and Henry. They're too interested in our money, in the insurance, in us selling the house. Jasmine is putting a lot of pressure on them. Yesterday, Charles told me I should be more concerned about my safety because at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but those words sounded like a threat. I love you, Margot. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons. The letter fell from my hands, fluttering to the dusty floor. Ernest had sensed his own impending death. He had seen the ominous signs that I, blinded by a mother's fierce, unconditional love, had tragically ignored. That night, Charles came to visit me again. He arrived with a bottle of wine, and that same practiced, now completely fake smile. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about your future," he said, pouring himself a generous glass without even asking if I wanted one. "The insurance money. It's already in process. It'll be $150,000. "How do you know the exact amount?" I asked, feigning an innocence I no longer felt, carefully watching his reaction. "Well, I helped Dad with the insurance paperwork," he said smoothly. "He wanted to make sure you had enough money to live comfortably." A blatant lie. Ernest had never wanted to increase the insurance. According to his own note, he had been pressured, manipulated by Charles. "And what do you think I should do with that money?" I asked, continuing my dangerous charade, carefully observing his every nuance. His eyes lit up with a glint that sent a fresh chill down my spine. "You could buy a smaller, cozier house, or even better, move into a nice retirement community where you'd have company and medical care. Henry and I could manage your money to make it go further." Manage my money. The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications. "We just want to take care of you, Mom. At your age, it's easy to get scammed or make bad financial decisions. We know about investments, about business. We could triple that amount in a few years. Triple my money, or make it disappear into their own greedy pockets." "Let me think about it," I said, desperate to buy myself time to breathe, to think, to plan. "Of course," Jasmine chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness from the doorway. "But not too long. For your own good." After they finally left, I sat in my kitchen, shaking with a potent cocktail of rage and fear. My own sons, my flesh and blood, had not only murdered their father, but were now meticulously planning to steal every last thing I had left. That night, my phone vibrated with a message longer, more detailed than the others. "Tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the report on Ernest's accident. There are contradictions you need to know about." The next day, with a newfound resolve that warred with my profound apprehension, I went to the local police station. Sergeant O'Connell, a kind, gruff man who had known Ernest for years, greeted me with a comforting familiarity. "The report on your husband's accident?" he asked, his brow furrowed with a confused expression. "What accident, Mrs. Hayes?" "From his shop," I clarified, my voice surprisingly steady. "When the machine exploded." The sergeant checked his files, then shook his head slowly. "We don't have any report of an explosion at Ernest's shop here. In fact, we don't have any report of a work accident involving your husband at all." I felt the world sway precariously beneath my feet. But my son said it was an accident at the shop. That's why he was in the Miel hospital." "Mrs. Hayes," the sergeant continued, his voice softening with concern, "your husband arrived at the hospital on Tuesday morning, but not from a work accident. According to the medical report I have here, he arrived unconscious with symptoms of poisoning." Poisoning. The word hung in the air, deadly and absolute. The doctors found traces of methanol in his blood, a quantity sufficient to cause blindness, brain damage, and eventually death. The hospital should have informed you of this poisoning. It hadn't been an explosion. It hadn't been a tragic work accident. Someone had deliberately, cold-bloodedly poisoned my husband. Why didn't anyone tell me this? I asked, my voice cracking, fragile as glass. The immediate family who signed the hospital papers requested that the information be kept confidential to avoid unnecessary speculation. They said you were too emotionally fragile to handle the technical details. The immediate family. Charles and Henry had hidden the true, horrific cause of Ernest's condition, invented the elaborate story of the explosion, and manipulated everyone, including me, to cover up a heinous murder. Mrs. Hayes, the sergeant continued, his voice grave, if you suspect the circumstances of your husband's death, we could open a formal investigation. I had more than suspicions. I was now absolutely certain that my own sons had murdered their father for money. That afternoon, Henry came home with a bouquet of flowers, his face adorned with the same fake, sickening smile as Charles. "How are you, Mom? You look tired." "I'm fine," I lied, my gaze unwavering, observing his every gesture from this terrifying new perspective. "I'm just thinking about the future." "That's good," he said too quickly. "Charles and I have been talking. We think you should sell the house soon while it's fresh on the real estate market." "Why the rush?" I pressed, my voice deceptively calm. "Well, old houses lose value quickly, and you need liquidity. Funeral expenses, pending medical bills." More lies. The funeral had been shockingly cheap, almost insultingly so, and there were no pending medical bills because the hospital insurance had conveniently covered them. "Henry," I said, looking him directly in his eyes, "you knew your dad didn't die from a work accident." For a fleeting fraction of a second, I saw raw panic flash in his expression, but he quickly recovered, his mask slipping back into place. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I went to the police station," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "There's no report of an explosion at your dad's shop." This time, the panic was more evident, a cold fear spreading across his features. "Mom, you shouldn't be doing things like that. They'll confuse you. The grief is getting to you." "The grief is getting to me," I challenged. "Or you've been lying to me." He got up abruptly, spilling the coffee I had poured for him, the dark liquid staining our old kitchen table. "I think you need to rest," he said, his voice strained. "We'll talk when you're calmer." He left quickly, but not before making a frantic phone call from the porch, though I couldn't discern the words. The tone, however, was urgent, worried, filled with alarm. That night, I received the most chilling, most revealing message yet. "They're coming together tomorrow. They're going to try to convince you that you're crazy, that grief is making you imagine things. Don't believe them, and don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink." The mysterious message's prediction came true, with terrifying precision. The very next day, Charles and Henry arrived together at my house, accompanied by Jasmine. They wore expressions of exaggerated concern, and Charles carried a bag of pastries from the downtown bakery, a place we rarely frequented. "Mom, we're so worried about you," Charles began in a saccharine, overly sweet voice. "The neighbors have told us you've been acting strange. Doris says you've been talking to yourself, that you aren't eating well." Doris had never said such a thing. It was just another cruel lie in their rapidly growing collection. "Jasmine even brought your favorite pastries," Henry added, pointing to the bag, "and we made special coffee from that brand you like so much." I remembered the message's stark warning. Don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink. It was entirely possible they were planning to poison me too, just as they had Ernest. "Thank you," I said, keeping my distance, my voice carefully neutral. "But I already had breakfast." "But Mom," Jasmine insisted, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "you need to eat properly. You've lost so much weight since Dad Ernest died." "I'm fine," I repeated firmly, my resolve hardening. Charles exchanged a significant, knowing look with Henry, the same look they had shared at the hospital when the doctor delivered Ernest's grim prognosis. "Mom," Charles said, sitting closer to me, his voice adopting a patronizing tone, "we want to talk to you about something very important. Henry and I have been consulting with some doctors about your recent behavior." "My behavior?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Yes. The strange questions you've been asking, the visits to the police station, that obsession with irrelevant details about Dad. It's normal after such a great loss, but it cannot be dangerous if it's not treated. Henry nodded gravely, playing his part. We spoke to Dr. Albright. He says it's common for older people to develop paranoia after losing a partner, especially women your age. Paranoia. They were accusing me of being insane for uncovering their elaborate web of lies. I am not paranoid, I declared, with all the firmness I could muster, my voice ringing with righteous indignation. I'm just asking questions I should have asked from the beginning. What questions? Charles challenged me, his eyes narrowing. Like why there's no police report for your father's supposed accident. Like why the shop is perfectly clean if there was an explosion. Like why you withdrew $5,000 from our account without telling me anything. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with their guilt. The three of them exchanged looks of thinly disguised panic, their masks momentarily cracking. Mom, Henry finally stammered, his usual composure rattled. Those things have simple explanations. Dad withdrew that money for repairs he wanted to do in secret, as a surprise for you. What surprise? I pressed, my gaze piercing. He wanted to remodel the house, Charles lied smoothly, improvising. He had hired some workers to fix the roof and paint the walls. He wanted it to be a surprise for your birthday. If that were true, where were the workers? Where were the materials? Why did no one in town know about this supposed remodeling? And about the police report, Charles continued, regaining some of his composure. Not all work accidents require a report, especially when they happen on private property. More lies. Sergeant O'Connell had been crystal clear. Any work accident with serious injuries absolutely requires an official report. Mom, Jasmine